The smell of coal dust rose as a deputy lifted the tarp beside the canal, winter light pressing down, footprints frozen into clay, a purse half buried near cattails. Silence broken only by radios crackling as officers realized the calendar said December, and the young woman had been missing for weeks. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Arizona in late December carries a particular stillness, a dry chill that settles over highways and citrus groves and makes even familiar towns feel emptied out. In 2009, the town of Casa Grande sat between Phoenix and Tucson like a pause in the desert, its storefronts trimmed with fading Christmas lights and local papers filled with reminders to lock doors and watch for neighbors. The discovery beside the irrigation canal ended that quiet. The victim was identified as Emily Rena Torres, 22 years old, a community college student who worked evenings at a family diner and volunteered during the holidays at a toy drive. Her name appeared first in a brief police bulletin, then on hand-printed flyers taped to gas station windows that no longer needed them. Emily had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier, on the Monday after Thanksgiving. Her mother told investigators Emily planned to shop for Christmas gifts after her shift and drive home along the frontage road. Her car was later found parked outside her apartment complex, keys missing, groceries still in the trunk. No signs of a struggle were documented at the vehicle. Patrol officers canvassed the area and spoke with neighbors who remembered holiday music drifting from open windows, nothing more. The case was logged, assigned, and placed in a growing stack that December always seemed to produce. When the canal site was processed, detectives followed procedure with the patients learned over decades. Photographs were taken before anything was moved. The surrounding soil was marked and measured. The purse contained Emily's identification and phone, the battery drained. A receipt dated December 3rd showed a purchase of wrapping paper and a small stuffed bear. There was no indication of robbery. The body, clothed and without obvious trauma visible at the scene, was transported under chain of custody to the county medical examiner. The autopsy report, finalized just before New Year's Eve, suggested a cause of death consistent with suffocation, with no defensive injuries noted. Time of death was estimated within 48 hours of her disappearance. Toxicology returned negative. The findings narrowed the window and pointed toward someone Emily may have trusted or encountered without alarm. Detectives noted this quietly and returned to timelines. Emily's routine was reconstructed from credit card records, phone pings, and witness statements. On the night she vanished, she left work at 9:14 p.m., confirmed by time clock. A coworker saw her walk to her car, carrying a bag of leftovers. Traffic cameras captured her vehicle entering the apartment complex at 9:31 p.m. That was the last confirmed sighting. Her phone showed no outgoing calls after 9:36 p.m. Interviews filled the weeks leading to Christmas. Friends described Emily as cautious, family-oriented, not prone to risky behavior. A former boyfriend was interviewed and eliminated through alibi verification and phone records. A neighbor recalled seeing a pickup truck idling near the parking lot that night, but could not describe the driver. The description was logged anyway. Media coverage intensified as the holidays approached. Local anchors spoke in measured tones about a young woman missing during a season of togetherness. Candlelight vigils were held in the park, attended by older residents who remembered different times and felt the familiar unease return. Tips came in steadily, most leading nowhere. The case cooled after New Year's Day. Detectives rotated assignments, but the file remained active. Evidence was cataloged and stored. The purse fibers were preserved. Soil samples were archived. For years, the Torres file was revisited every December when new detectives read old notes and wondered if something had been missed in the quiet spaces between facts. In 2016, advances in forensic databases prompted a review of unsolved cases involving young women found near waterways. Emily's case met criteria. A re-examination of the purse revealed trace fibers inconsistent with her clothing or car interior. The fibers were sent for comparison against regional samples, a long process that yielded no immediate match. The breakthrough came from an unexpected angle. In early 2019, a man named Daniel Reed was arrested in Pinal County on unrelated charges. Reed, then 48, had lived in Casa Grande in 2009 and worked seasonal construction jobs. During booking, his fingerprints were entered into updated systems. A detective reviewing Reed's background noticed a prior traffic citation near the Canal access road dated December 2009, 2 days after Emily disappeared. The detail had been overlooked at the time as routine. Reed was re-interviewed under standard conditions. He denied knowing Emily and claimed he used the Canal road to avoid holiday traffic. His statements were compared against archived phone tower data. Analysts found Reed's phone had pinged near Emily's apartment complex on the night she vanished, despite his earlier claim he was out of town. Confronted with the discrepancy, Reed requested an attorney. A search warrant was obtained for Reed's former storage unit, long abandoned but documented. Investigators recovered a box of old clothing. Fiber analysis matched the trace fibers from Emily's purse to a jacket found in the box. The match was documented, reviewed, and independently verified. In late 2020, Reed was formally charged with second-degree murder. The arrest shocked the community, not for spectacle, but for the quiet realization that answers had waited in records all along. At trial, prosecutors presented a methodical case built on timelines, forensic linkage, and Reed's inconsistent statements. The defense offered no alternative explanation that aligned with the evidence. Reed was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life. Emily Torres' family attended the sentencing in silence. The courthouse emptied into a winter afternoon much like the 1 year earlier. The case file was closed, marked solved, and returned to storage. In Casa Grande, Christmas lights still went up each year, but the story remained, a reminder of patience, procedure, and the long reach of careful investigation. The months following the discovery moved slowly, governed by procedure rather than urgency. Detectives returned to their desks while holiday decorations were taken down across town, replaced by the dull rhythm of January. Emily Torres' file was thickened with supplementary reports, each page stamped, dated, and cross-referenced. The case was not abandoned, but it slipped into the category familiar to every department, unresolved yet active, waiting for something new to surface. Emily's funeral took place under a pale winter sky. Attendance was steady, not dramatic, marked by older residents who had watched similar ceremonies over decades and understood how silence often followed tragedy. The local paper ran a final holiday season article, then moved on. The Torres family kept the porch light on through January, a habit that lingered long after hope changed shape. Investigators continued methodical follow-ups through early 2010. Credit card companies were recontacted. Bank records were reviewed again for transactions that might have been missed during the rush of December. Nothing surfaced beyond what was already documented. Emily's phone records were reanalyzed for pattern irregularities, but the absence of calls after 9:36 p.m. remained the last digital trace. The Canal site was revisited once spring arrived. Water levels were lower, exposing mudbanks that had been submerged during winter irrigation cycles. Evidence technicians searched again, knowing the likelihood of recovery was minimal. A single broken button was collected, later determined not to belong to the victim. The effort was recorded anyway. By Thanksgiving 2010, the case was formally reclassified as cold. That designation did not end work. It changed its pace. A senior detective summarized findings in a review memo, highlighting the lack of forced entry, the intact purse, and the absence of defensive injuries. The memo concluded with a recommendation for future DNA testing if technology improved. It was signed and filed. Over the next several years, Casa Grande changed in small ways. New housing developments expanded toward the desert. The diner where Emily worked closed and reopened under new ownership. Each December, her name resurfaced briefly in anniversary pieces, often paired with reminders about safety during the holidays. The tone remained restrained, factual, and familiar to readers who had aged alongside the story. In 2014, the department transitioned to a new digital records system. Older cases were scanned and indexed, including Emily's. This process forced detectives to reread reports line by line. One note, previously handwritten and easy to overlook, mentioned a traffic stop near the Canal on December 5, 2009. At the time, it had seemed unrelated. The driver had been cited for a broken tail light and released. The name attached to that citation was Daniel Reed. The note did not suggest suspicion, only proximity. Reed's address at the time placed him less than 2 miles from Emily's apartment complex. The information was logged in the new system with searchable tags, then archived. Years passed without incident. Reed moved between counties, working short-term construction contracts. He accumulated minor offenses, none violent. His name remained dormant in the database, one of thousands linked loosely to unsolved cases. In 2018, a statewide initiative encouraged agencies to re-examine cold cases involving young adults found near waterways. Emily's case was flagged automatically. A detective nearing retirement was assigned to conduct a final review. He approached the file with the caution of someone who had seen false hope before. The review focused on inconsistencies rather than gaps. One detail stood out. The pickup truck reported by a neighbor idling near the apartment complex had never been conclusively identified. Vehicle registrations from 2009 were cross-checked again. Daniel Reed owned a pickup matching the general description during that period. The neighbor's statement, though vague, aligned in color and size. Phone data analysis had improved since the original investigation. Analysts were able to reconstruct historical tower pings with greater precision. Reed's phone records, obtained after his 2019 arrest on unrelated charges, showed his device active in Casa Grande on the night Emily disappeared, contradicting his earlier claim of being out of town. The discrepancy was small but measurable. Investigators proceeded cautiously. Reed was brought in for a voluntary interview. He appeared cooperative, answering questions in a measured tone, but his timeline shifted when pressed about December 2009. He denied knowing Emily and offered explanations that could not be independently verified. The interview ended without arrest, but suspicion was documented. A search warrant request was drafted and reviewed multiple times. Probable cause rested on cumulative factors rather than a single revelation. When approved, detectives searched a storage unit Reed had rented years earlier. Inside were boxes of clothing and personal effects left behind after missed payments. Among them was a heavy jacket consistent with construction wear. The jacket was sent for forensic testing. Fibers recovered from Emily's purse years earlier were compared using updated microscopy and chemical analysis. The results indicated a match consistent with a common manufacturing batch, but rare enough to carry weight. Independent labs confirmed the findings. Prosecutors were consulted early. They emphasized the need for corroboration beyond forensic similarity. Investigators returned to witness lists. The neighbor who had reported the idling truck was re-interviewed. Time had dulled memory, but the witness confirmed the truck's general appearance and placement. Reed's employment records placed him off work the night Emily vanished. Gas station receipts showed a purchase near her apartment complex within the relevant time frame. Each piece alone was insufficient. Together, they formed a pattern. By late 2020, the case was ready. Charges were filed quietly. Reed was arrested without incident. News of the arrest spread through Casa Grande with a restrained shock. There were no press conferences filled with spectacle, only a brief statement confirming progress in a long dormant case. The trial unfolded methodically the following year. Prosecutors presented timelines, forensic reports, and Reed's inconsistent statements. The jury listened to technical explanations delivered without embellishment. The defense challenged the age of the evidence but could not account for the convergence of data. After deliberation, the verdict was returned: guilty. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime and the years that had passed. There was no celebration, only a closing of records. For Emily Torres' family, the resolution arrived quietly, long after the seasons that framed her disappearance. Casa Grande moved forward, its holidays marked by familiar routines, the case now part of the town's recorded history, resolved through patience, persistence, and adherence to process. The conviction did not end the examination of the past. After the verdict, internal reviews were conducted, not to reopen wounds but to understand how the case had remained dormant for so long. Senior staff compiled a chronology tracing every decision made between December 2009 and the arrest more than a decade later. The purpose was institutional memory, a way to refine future investigations rather than assign blame. The review noted the pressures of seasonal caseloads, the limitations of technology at the time, and the absence of immediate forensic identifiers. Emily Torres' case had never been mishandled, but it had been constrained by what was possible in that moment. This distinction mattered to detectives who had carried the weight of unresolved cases across their careers. During sentencing, the court heard a summary of impact statements, paraphrased into the record rather than delivered aloud. The language was formal, restrained, and precise. Emily was described not in poetic terms but through facts: her age, her work schedule, her plans for graduate school, her habit of calling her mother on Sunday evenings. The judge acknowledged the endurance of the family and the patience required to reach this outcome. Daniel Reed was sentenced according to statutory guidelines in effect at the time of the offense. The sentence included eligibility for parole decades in the future, a technical detail recorded without emphasis. Reed was transferred to a state facility quietly, without escort cameras or public comment. His name was added to a list of offenders whose cases were cited in training materials on delayed resolution. Media coverage after sentencing was brief. The local paper ran a final article under a small headline, noting the closure of a long-running case. The tone matched the readership, many of whom had followed the story since it first appeared during the winter of 2009. Letters to the editor expressed relief rather than outrage. The emphasis was on completion. Emily Torres' name was removed from active missing persons databases, replaced with a notation indicating resolution. Her photograph remained archived, part of a record that would be accessed only for reference. The flyers that once lined storefront windows had long since faded, but one remained in a courthouse file, preserved as evidence. For investigators, the case became a reference point. It demonstrated the value of preserving evidence even when immediate leads were exhausted. The fibers recovered from the purse, once insignificant, had become central years later. The traffic citation, a minor event at the time, had anchored a timeline. Each element underscored the cumulative nature of methodical police work. Casa Grande itself absorbed the news in its own way. The town continued to mark holidays with parades and charity drives. The canal where Emily was found remained part of the irrigation system, its banks maintained and monitored. No memorial marker was placed there. Instead, Emily's family established a small scholarship at the community college she attended, announced each December without ceremony. As the years passed, the case was occasionally referenced in discussions about cold case funding. State officials cited it when advocating for resources to digitize older records. The argument was practical rather than emotional. Cases like Emily's showed that resolution was possible with persistence and incremental improvement. The detectives most closely associated with the investigation retired within a few years of the conviction. Their final evaluations noted professionalism and adherence to protocol. In exit interviews, they spoke about the quiet satisfaction of seeing a file closed properly, even if the resolution came late. Emily's mother sold the family home in 2023, downsizing to a smaller place closer to relatives. She kept a single box of documents related to the case, including copies of police reports and court transcripts. These were organized, labeled, and stored, reflecting a desire for order rather than remembrance. Every December, local law enforcement conducted internal briefings on seasonal crime trends. Emily's case was mentioned once each year, not as a warning, but as an example of how routine moments could carry lasting consequences. The emphasis was on vigilance during periods when communities are distracted by holidays. The Canal discovery remained the defining image for those who worked the case. It was described in training sessions not with drama, but with detail. The position of the purse, the condition of the ground, the quiet that followed initial radio calls. These details reinforced the importance of observation and restraint. In legal circles, the case was cited for its reliance on circumstantial evidence, strengthened by forensic corroboration. Law reviews summarized it as a demonstration of how modern analysis could breathe new life into dormant investigations. The discussion avoided speculation and focused on process. For the Torres family, closure was gradual. It did not arrive with the verdict alone, but with time. Holidays became less charged. The empty chair at Thanksgiving remained, but the sense of unanswered questions faded. The family's public statements emphasized gratitude toward investigators rather than condemnation of the offender. The courthouse file was eventually transferred to long-term storage. Its cover bore a simple label with the case number and the word "resolved." Inside, the final document was a summary report noting the conviction and sentence. It was signed, dated, and filed. Casa Grande continued to exist between highways and desert, its winters cool and quiet. The case of Emily Torres became part of its recorded past, a reminder that even in small towns, complexity endures. The resolution did not change what had happened, but it affirmed that the passage of time did not erase responsibility. The final phase of the case unfolded without ceremony, marked by paperwork rather than emotion. After sentencing, appellate deadlines passed without action, and the conviction settled into permanence. The record reflected no procedural errors, no evidentiary gaps sufficient to disturb the outcome. For the system, that finality mattered. It meant the years invested had produced something stable, something that would not unravel with time. In the months that followed, Evidence items were reassessed for retention. The jacket, the purse, the soil samples, and the archived digital records were cataloged under long-term storage protocols. Each item was photographed again, not for investigation, but for preservation. The physical reminders of December 2009 were reduced to labeled containers on steel shelving in a climate-controlled room. Training divisions incorporated the case into instructional material. New investigators were shown how routine documentation could become decisive years later. The emphasis remained procedural. No dramatization was encouraged. The lesson centered on continuity, on the discipline of writing reports as if someone unknown might read them decades later. For the broader community, the resolution filtered slowly. Some residents learned of the conviction months afterward, through brief mentions at civic meetings or a short recap in the year-end paper. The reaction was subdued. There were no rallies, no visible expressions of anger or celebration. The prevailing sentiment was acknowledgement, followed by return to routine. Emily Torres' name appeared one last time in public records during the annual report issued by the county attorney's office. The case was listed among solved cold cases, a single line noting year of offense, year of arrest, and disposition. It stood alongside others, stripped of narrative, equal in typeface and spacing. Her family chose privacy after that point. They declined interviews and closed the dedicated email account that had once received tips. What remained was correspondence from investigators, neatly organized, and court documents stamped and sealed. The focus shifted away from the case and toward ordinary life, adjusted but continuing. Daniel Reed's incarceration followed a predictable pattern. Intake assessments were completed. Classification determined housing and work assignments. His name appeared on rosters and logs, indistinct from others. The crime that defined his sentence was reduced to a number in a system designed to manage time. Parole eligibility dates were calculated and entered into databases, far enough in the future to feel abstract. The certainty lay not in release but in the structure imposed by the sentence. For the legal system, that structure represented accountability achieved within the boundaries of law. Each winter thereafter, Casa Grande returned to its seasonal rhythm. December brought cooler nights, early darkness, and familiar rituals. The canal continued to carry water through fields. Few remembered the exact location where Emily had been found. The town did not mark it. Memory shifted to records where it belonged. Law enforcement leadership reviewed the case during budget discussions, citing it when arguing for sustained funding for forensic analysis and digital archiving. The argument avoided emotion. It focused on measurable outcomes, on the demonstrable value of maintaining old evidence properly. Decision-makers responded in kind, approving incremental improvements rather than sweeping reforms. The detectives who had reopened the case occasionally received letters from colleagues in other states, asking about specific procedures used. They answered in practical terms, sharing checklists and timelines. The exchange reflected professional respect rather than notoriety. Emily's scholarship fund continued quietly, awarded each spring to a student meeting modest criteria. The announcement appeared as a brief notice, without mention of the crime. The name endured, detached from circumstances, associated instead with opportunity. As years passed, the case receded from conversation. It remained accessible to those who sought it, housed in files and databases, but it no longer demanded attention. That transition marked the final stage of resolution, when a case moves fully into history. For those who worked it, the memory persisted in fragments. The cold air by the canal, the weight of a file folder, the moment when disparate details aligned. These recollections were personal, unrecorded, and ultimately unimportant to the official outcome. What mattered was that the process held. The Arizona 2009 case concluded without spectacle, consistent with its investigation. It demonstrated how patience, preservation, and adherence to method could overcome years of uncertainty. The answer arrived late, but intact. The system did what it was designed to do, imperfectly yet sufficiently. In the end, the story settled into quiet aftermath. A young woman's life was documented, her death investigated, and responsibility assigned through lawful means. The town moved forward, the records remained, and December returned each year with its familiar stillness, carrying both memory and closure within the same cold air.